Hello. In this video, I will be doing my very best to explain how to perform world map manipulation in Final Fantasy VII, and specifically in this case, I'm going to be showing how to do it from Kalm to the Midgar Zolom at the end of the Kalm flashback. There's a lot of rules and situations that you'll need to be aware of for performing this kind of stuff, so I'm going to be doing my best to cover generic rules for doing world map manipulation and then specific rules for doing this particular world map manipulation. So here we go. So these are rules that should apply if you were to ever try world map manipulation anywhere in the game. So world map encounters are determined by three variables: the in-game time, XY coordinate position, so your exact position on the world map, and the amount of steps you've moved. So if you want to do this manipulation for anywhere in the game, these three constants, or these three variables have to remain constant. If not, there's just 0% chance you'll be able to have a reliable manipulation. It just won't happen reliably. The chart that will be in the description is for console in-game times, but can be correlated to emulator by subtracting 1 in-game second. So for example, if the chart is going for the in-game time 157.06, you would want to use 157.05 on emulator. And I'm sure this would work for almost all emulators, but the emulator I use for this is PSX Fin version 1.13. So now we'll go into specific rules and conditions for this manipulation. So when you're leaving Kalm, you'll want to check your in-game time as close as you possibly can to the exit. When you're on the world map, you want the camera to be the static view, so where the camera never moves freely. You can switch this by pressing R2. The Zolom setups that you'll see will be dynamic in terms of the amount of time it takes to perform the setup, but I'll explain more about all this later. And we know that in Final Fantasy VII, when you get an encounter on the world map, the Midgar Zolom's position resets in the lake. I'm not exactly sure about which direction it'll start going when this reset happens, but we do know for a fact that the position resets after an encounter. And on this chart, any scenario that I find not viable, I don't have any extra notes for. And like I said, you'll understand what all this means hopefully here in the next few minutes. So again, the chart that you're going to see in the description has 5 values and terms that you'll need to know, which are up here on the top. So in-game timer is obviously the in-game time you'd be using. Encounters is going to be the number of encounters you get. This is really just a formality, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to it. As well as location. It really only applies to if you're not getting a good encounter. As you'll see, there's some blanks here. Viable means if it's viable in terms of an RTA strat. So if you're doing it in a real-time scenario, is it a good choice? And a note. So if there's anything that you would want to know, like for example, in IGT 157.14, you'll see that you'll get a thief, which if you have an item that you don't want stolen could be a problem, and you might not want to use that IGT, but it would vary from person to person. So you see all these numbers and letters and everything, and I'm going to go ahead and explain what all these mean. And when you're using this chart, there will be 5 different scenarios that you can get, so I'm going to go through each one of them now. So the first one we'll do is 1 blank in. So that's when you have 1 in the encounters column, 0 or nothing in the location column, and in the viable column. So if you're using this in-game time, it's almost never going to be the preferable scenario. It's the scenario where you're going to get an encounter the quickest, and you won't even make it to the mountain before you get an encounter, and you're likely to get a second encounter, but as we know, when you get an encounter, the Zolom's position resets. So if you were to happen to get a second encounter by the lake, then it might end up being viable. But in almost all scenarios, you're not going to prefer this outcome. So let's go ahead and illustrate this scenario. So to do 1 blank in, we'll pick IGT 157.18. So We'll use my emulator, and just remember, since we're on emulator, it's 1 second before, so since we're doing 157.18, we're going to close it right there, 157.17. So pay attention to the timing here, and I guess I'll show you my position. So if you're coming out of this house here, I like having the arrow here so you can kind of walk down and then just move cloud so that is as close as possible to the exit. This will work just fine right here. So this is where you want to be. And like I said, since we're doing IGT 157.18, we're going to close the menu at 157.17. Bum, bum, like this. And you're holding run and down right once you leave the screen. And then remember, in order for this to work, our movement and everything has to be consistent. So we're holding down right here and not anything else. And notice that our camera is static. And as you can see, we get an encounter before we even get to the mountain. So this is almost always going to be not a viable scenario. But I made it available in case for some reason you'd want to know. So, the next scenario would be 1M in. So this means you'll get 1 encounter minimum. It'll be on the mountain, but due to its location, it's probably not going to be a good spot. And remember, we said that even though you might get 2 encounters with 1 blank in, you could get a second encounter, and that second encounter could assist you in getting a good Zolom skip setup. But this encounter is closer to the lake. So let's do this one. So for this one, it's going to be 157.19. So remember, emulator, we're going to close it at 157.18. Bum. Remember, we're holding right, down, and run as we're leaving Kalm, and we're just holding down and right on the world map. Let's go ahead and speed this up a little bit. So now we're on the mountain. So 1M in is going to be somewhere on that little stretch there in the mountain, and as you see, we got it. So it's pretty far from the lake. Now, as I mentioned before, in any scenario where the viable condition is in, I have not listed if there's any notes. So I did not put pincer here. Anything that has an in condition, you won't see a note like this. So, next scenario will be 0/1MYZ. In almost all scenarios, this is going to be the best case because it's going to guarantee that you have 0 encounters up to a certain point. Not getting an encounter all the way to the lake doesn't guarantee a Zolom setup. That's what YZ stands for. But if you get an encounter before the lake, it's almost always going to give you a good Zolom setup. So there's a few different ways that this can go down, so I'm going to try to explain as much of it as I can. So for this one, let's use in-game time 157.20, which on emulator would be 157.19. And close. Okay. So we're running. Okay, and this is where your constant variables comes in. So the entire time from Kalm to here, we are holding down and right. But once we make this turn, as far as I know, it's not possible to have a consistent movement going from here around the mountain. So when the encounter number says 0/1, that means up to this point right here, when you turn around the mountain, you are guaranteed to have 0 encounters. But once you turn here, it's possible you could have 0 to 1 encounters right here. So if you were to walk here and get 0 encounters up to here, you either have the option of just looking at the Zolom and trying to set up Zolom skip, or you can force an encounter. So here, and then you could just try to do Zolom in the way you would normally do it. Or, what we could do is force an encounter. So, for here, once again, since we can't guarantee this encounter, I can't tell you what kind of encounter it's going to be. But now, since we've gotten this encounter and know that the Midgar Zolom's position resets after an encounter, you should be able to give yourself a fairly reliable Zolom setup. So for this scenario, like I said, it's really going to come down to what you want to do, but this is a lot of information and it's good information to know for a run. Alright, so the next scenario will be 1MYZ. That means we'll get one encounter, it'll still be on the mountain, but it gives us a Zolom skip setup. And this is definitely going to be a good one to use in runs. You just have to pay very close attention to your movement after the encounter. Any situation in this chart that has a YZ, you need to do this exact setup, or I can't guarantee you'll have a good Zolom setup. And I'll explain this now. So we're going to use IGT value 157.28, which of course is 157.27 in emulator. So, bum. Okay. So we're running. We're going to get encounter right about here. Since there's no note, it shouldn't be an encounter we have to worry about, which it's not. Alright, now pay attention. So you have to do a very specific set of movement in order for to guarantee this setup with my chart. So once your encounter is done, no matter where it is, usually for a YZ scenario, it's going to be somewhere in this line right here. In order to guarantee this setup, when you leave the encounter, you need to be holding down and left. So you'll end up running to about here. Once you get here, you need to hold left. Okay. Get out of my way, Zolom. And then once you are right here, you need to wiggle between left and down left to get to the corner. So from here, you'd go left and then wiggle down and left until you get to the corner. So let's see this in practice. So I have a save state made from the end of the last encounter. So I'm going to hold down left, left, and then wiggle left while left and down, and you'll get into this corner here. And then from here you can move the camera or do whatever you need to do, but you should almost always get a good Zolom setup. And then the last scenario would be one MY. So 1MY is kind of it's good and bad, I suppose. So with 1MY, you're going to get an encounter close to the lake before you make the turn on the mountain. But unlike the previous scenario, there isn't a good Zolom setup for it that's reliable and consistent using the movement that I just described. But as we've learned, the Zolom position resets after you get an encounter. So it at least will give you a chance to have either less low encounters going to the lake, or it might even put you in a position where you're able to make a quick Zolom setup. So let's show this last scenario here. So we're going to use IGT 157.14, and notice that there's a note that will get a thief encounter. So let's see how this plays out. So 157.14 will be 13 on emulator. So anytime it's going to be a 1MY, you're going to get an encounter after this bend right here. So anywhere in here is where you're going to get that encounter. So notice we have a thief, so you use at your own discretion. I'm going to make a save state after the encounter. Now I'm going to do the same movement I just described for the YZ, so left, or down left, and then wiggling down and left. And you'll notice, wow, okay, you get a good setup, but in all my testings for 1MY scenarios, it's not a reliable setup. So use at your own discretion, I suppose. But the point of having a 1MY is so that you have a decent chance of maybe getting a quick Zolom setup. So please use that scenario at your own discretion. So hopefully this covers any of the 5 world map manipulation scenarios you get in a run. There are other notes in this document other than just thief. Some are like a double thief with a back attack. There's a few that are preemptives. So those are all good to know when you're trying to do a manipulation. But otherwise, that should do it. Thank you for watching.